Welcome to the Travel Voice. On today's episode, we are going to talk about becoming foreigner. When does foreignness begin? In the eyes of others or inside ourselves? The placement is not incorporated, it is told. How and where others situate us before we position ourselves, before we speak. By the culture, the environment, the family, and later the peers. Foreignness is not something we have to acknowledge within the borders of recognition, therefore belonging. It's because we no longer feel a part of, or we never did, that we can speak about strangeness of being. This brings me to what means to be a foreigner at home, wherever that is. I've experienced this sense of strangeness while living in France, in Paris. People couldn't tell whereabouts my accent was from. You have an accent. You have an accent. Vous avez un petit accent, they would say. They couldn't say it was Portuguese, therefore I couldn't be recognized as part of the biggest migrant population in France. However, in Marseille, another French city where I also lived, they immediately placed me under the Parisian umbrella. Being fluent in French didn't matter for being assimilated as part of them. I can use the language as a tool, but that doesn't mean that I belong. In both Paris and Marseille, I was being situated within the geography of belonging, as foreign. And this is not theoretical, this is daily life. What I lived in France is not an anecdote, it is structure. This is not about accent, this is about placement. And when this category fails, the question is no longer curiosity. It becomes a way to correct my placement. In a certain way, fluency gave me access to comprehension, but not yet to the position. I could be seen, but I didn't exist in cultural script through others read me. The suspended moment when the interaction loses its coordinates reveals how the other tries to align their puzzle pieces based on what a Portuguese in France is supposed to be. When the person in front of me can't make the pieces fit, the emptiness, not the belonging, becomes a kind of neutrality projected back onto me, as if I had no story, as if the foreignness wasn't there, only because they couldn't read it. I have never hidden where I am from, nor my journey or my roots. But I am not part of the Portuguese immigration wave from the 50s. I moved there alone. The reasons repeat itself in my story as much as anyone else. I left looking for a better life. For me, disguised as a 1-year experience that became nearly a decade. But to be recognized without belonging, it is displacement. Imagine the reverse situation. What happens when the placement appears correct and still misplaces you? In São Paulo, Brazil, I needed to repeatedly correct people when they assumed I was a Brazilian migrant in Portugal. Every time I was asked where I am from, I would answer, I am Portuguese. The moment the reply didn't match the expectation, they would repeat the question. Yes, but here, from Brazil. As if I was denying my identity instead of clarifying it. The question was no longer about knowing me, it was about correcting where I should fit. There is a false proximity in the interaction that relies on the illusion of sameness. Same language, similar gestures, recognizable rhythm in speech. So the mind assumes shared origin. It feels like recognition, but it is only choreography. And when the choreography breaks, the interaction breaks with it. How come you are Portuguese? We understand you so well. Meaning, if I understand you, you must be one of us. Understanding becomes proof of belonging until you speak as yourself. I had the codes there, the accent, the body language, the appearance. but not the culture nor the roots. Our shared language is not one. It is two histories living inside similar sounds. So when then I spoke in Portuguese from Portugal, what was a common ground instantly turned into strangeness again. Sameness disappeared and the distance returned. In Brazil, I was not a foreign because I was outside. I was a foreign inside as assumed closeness. The discomfort was not a cultural shock, but misplacement. They thought they had found me, but they had not. When foreigners enters the body, we start to be recognized as foreigners when our roles don't reflect others' recognition. This starts in an administration. We don't have the same rights nor obligations. When in a calendar we don't celebrate events, or simply we don't use the same calendar. When the letters that before had a meaning and a sound gain new shapes. Even that same alphabet metric of our language is transformed. To be foreign is to carry different rules within oneself. Here it becomes visible that foreignness is in the skin of the one speaking and begins when the other asks for confirmation. Our accent, our nationality, our origin. Learning and speaking a foreign language is a tool to build a bridge, to reinvent oneself, and to enter the set of rules that are no longer home. To be foreign is a process that emerges from the contact with the other. It defines rules, limits, and barriers. It's when what assembles us doesn't support what differentiates us. Therefore, it doesn't bring us closer by what we recognize, but creates distance through our differences. And language is one of those engines that we can use, test, and navigate. But it requires movement beyond semantics. It is necessary to integrate codes, textures, and cultural references, often mistakenly treated by the beginner learner as the need to mirror one language into the other. The foreignness where you belong. Among all experiences, the most unforgettable was not to be recognized in Portugal. Being a Portuguese from the plains of Alentejo, I grew up with the stigma of being misplaced. The jump from the association of belonging to a poor region, less educated or developed in a country, to be placed as alien to my own country was shocking. Despite these events having happened years after I had been living in Paris, they were enough to create a memory of foreignness. I was in a cafe in a local place speaking Portuguese, my native language, and people replied in English. This is a common situation, many tourists and migrants living their experience. But that is part of the belonging. The codes, the appearance, the body, also the accent. I couldn't understand that I was no longer recognized as part of it. I was foreign again. How could it happen that I had changed without noticing, and that Portugal remained still without seeing me? For a moment, I thought this was only because Lisbon became a hub for people choosing to live there. But then another episode happened. I entered the bus, and before I had the time to speak, the driver addressed me in French. I paused and continued in Portuguese. He then switched to English. Beyond his linguistic abilities to assist tourists, what surprised me was that he was not recognizing me at all. He wasn't hearing me inside the cultural frame. I no longer matched home. What before was a negative social marker through the associations to Alentejo became an experience of seeing myself through the lens of those that experience Portugal as foreigners, which in Portugal is treated as a positive social marker, because this They could speak my language, they thought so, without having for me to speak Portuguese. This form of qualifying the other isn't a form, it's a form of erasing their own identity. They weren't failing to recognize me. I was no longer legible to them. I wasn't misrecognized because they were mistaken. I was misrecognized because I had changed. I could be the same person only if they could see me as before, as the person from Alentejo with a strong accent. There was no space for the new version to participate in the interaction. It's not only losing face at home, but no longer appearing on the stage at all. If our new identity has transformed and that we cannot participate in the interaction, it should be in the backstage that we belong. It's the intermezzo that played. We belong to nowhere. To be foreign at home is to have nowhere to return to, not because there is no place, but because no place received you back as you become. Home stays still, and you didn't. But foreignness is not only geographical, it is the impossibility of legibility. Once the place that made you no longer recognize you or is no longer able to read you, you don't return home. You return to a version of yourself that no longer exists. If no one sees you, who you have become, it is the becoming itself that is left without ground. Foreignness stops being a location and becomes a condition of being. Not outside, not inside, unplaced. This is where exile begins without borders, when the self no longer fits the coordinates that once held home. And this is also where a new language of self has to be built, not to translate, but to exist. I will explore this in the next episode. What identity becomes when there is no cultural mirror left to return to ourselves. I hope to see you soon in another episode. Thank you for listening to The Travel Voice.